Amelia grabbed Claire's other arm, and before Claire could so much as grab a breath, she was being pulled through the portal. There was a brief wave of chill, and a feeling that was a little like being pushed from all sides, and then she was stumbling into utter, complete blackness. Her other senses went into overdrive. The air smelt stale and heavy, and felt cold and damp, like a cave. Amelia's icy grip on one arm was going to leave bruises, and Hannah Moses' warmer touch on the other seemed light by contrast, although Claire knew it wasn't. Claire could hear herself and Hannah breathing, but there was no sound at all from the vampires. When Claire tried to speak, Amelia's ice-cold hand covered her mouth. She nodded convulsively, and concentrated on putting one foot in front of the other as Amelia, she hoped it was still Amelia anyway, pulled her forward into the dark. The smells changed from time to time. A whiff of nasty, rotten something, then something else that smelt weirdly like grapes. Her imagination conjured up a dead man surrounded by broken bottles of wine, and Claire couldn't stop it there. The dead man was moving, squirming towards her, and any second now, he'd touch her and she'd scream. It's just your imagination. Stop it. She swallowed and tried to tamp down the panic. It wasn't helping. Shane wouldn't panic. Shane wouldn't be caught dead roaming around in the dark with a bunch of vampires like this, and Claire knew it. It seemed like they went on forever. And then Amelia pulled her to a stop and let go. Losing that support felt as if she was standing on the edge of a cliff, and Claire was really, really grateful for Hannah's grip to tell her there was something else real in the world. Don't let me fall. And then Hannah's hand went away, a fast tightening of her fingers, and she was gone. Claire was floating in total darkness, disconnected, alone. Her breath sounded loud as a train in her ears, but it was buried under the thunder of her fast heartbeats. Move, she told herself. Do something, she whispered. Hannah? Cold hands slapped round her from behind, one pinning her arms to her sides, the other covering her mouth. She was lifted off the ground and she screamed, a faint buzzing sound like a swarm of bees that didn't make it through the muffling gag. And then she went flying through the air into the darkness and rolled to a stop face down on a cold stone floor. There was light here, faint but definite, painting the edges of things a pale grey, including the arched mouth of the tunnel at the end of the hall. She had no idea where she was. Claire got quickly to her feet and turned to look behind her. Amelia, pale as a pearl, stepped through the portal, and with her came the other two vampires. Gerard had Hannah Moses' arms gripped in his good hand. Hannah had a bloody gash in her hand, and when Gerard let go, she dropped to her knees, breathing hard. Her eyes looked blank and unfocused. Amelia whirled, something silver in one hand, and stabbed as something came at her from the dark. It screamed, a thin sound that echoed through the tunnel, and a white hand reached out to grab Amelia's shirt. The invisible portal slammed shut like an iris, and severed the arm just above the elbow. Amelia plucked the still grabbing hand from her shirt, dropped the hand to the ground, and kicked it to the side. When she turned back to the others, there was no expression on her face. Claire felt like throwing up. She couldn't take her eyes away from the wiggling, fish-pale hand. It was necessary to come this way, Amelia said. Dangerous, but necessary. Where are we? Claire asked. Amelia gave her a look and ignored her as she took the lead, heading down the hall. Going through this didn't give her any right to ask questions. Of course. Hannah? Are you okay? Hannah waved her hand vaguely, which really wasn't all that confidence-building. The vampire Gerard answered for her. She's fine. Sure. He could talk having one hand burnt to the bone. He'd probably classify himself as fine too. Take her, Gerard ordered, and pushed Hannah towards Claire as he moved to follow Amelia. The other bodyguard, what was his name, moved with him, as if they were an old, practiced team. Hannah was heavy, but she pulled herself back on her own centre of gravity after a breath or two. I'm fine, she said, and gave Claire a reassuring grin. Damn, that was not a walk in the park. You should meet my boyfriend, Claire said. You two are both masters of understatements. She thought Hannah wanted to laugh, but instead she just nodded and patted Claire on the shoulder. Watch the sides, she said. We're just starting on this thing. That was an easy job, because there was nothing to watch on the sides. They were, after all, in a tunnel. Hannah, it appeared, was the rear guard, and she seemed to take it very seriously, although it looked like Amelia had slammed the doorway behind them pretty hard with prejudice. I don't have to go back that way, Claire thought, and shivered at the sight of the pale severed hand behind them. It had finally stopped moving. I really, really hope we don't have to go back there. At the mouth of the tunnel, Amelia seemed to pause for a moment, and then disappear to the right, around the corner, with her 2 vampire bodyguards in flying formation behind her. Hannah and Claire hurried to keep up, and emerged into another hallway. This one square instead of arched and panelled in rich, dark wood. There were paintings on the walls, old ones, Claire thought, of pale people lit by candlelight, dressed in about 1,000 pounds of costume and rice-white makeup and wigs. She stopped and backed up, staring at one. What? Hannah growled. That's her. Amelie. It definitely was. Only instead of the princess grey-style clothes she wore now, in the picture she was wearing an elaborate sky-blue satin dress, cut way low over her breasts. She was wearing a big white wig and staring out of the canvas in an eerily familiar way. Art appreciation later, Claire. We need to go. That was true, beyond any argument, but Claire kept throwing glances at the paintings as they passed. One looked like it could have been Oliver, from about 400 years ago. One more modern, one looked almost like Merlin. It's the Vampire Museum, she realised. It's their history. There were glass cases lining the hall ahead, filled with books and papers and jewellery, clothing and musical instruments. All the fine and fabulous things gathered through their long, long lives. Ahead, the 3 vampires came to a sudden, motionless halt, and Hannah grabbed Claire by the arm to pull her out of the way, against the wall. What's happening? Claire whispered. Sorting credentials. Claire didn't know what that meant exactly, but when she risked moving out just a bit to see what was happening, she saw that there was lots of other vampires in here. About 100 of them, some sitting down and obviously hurt. There were humans too, mostly standing together and looking nervous, which seemed reasonable. If these were Bishop's people, their little rescue party was in serious trouble. Amelia exchanged some quiet words with the vampire who seemed to be in charge, and Gerard and his partner visibly relaxed. That settled the friend or foe question. Apparently, Amelia turned and nodded to Claire, and she and Anna edged out from behind the glass cases to join them. Amelia made a gesture, and immediately several vampires peeled off from the group and joined her in a distant corner. What's going on? Claire asked, and stared around her. Most of the vampires were still dressed in the costumes they'd worn to Bishop's welcome feast, but a few were in more military dress, black mostly, but some in camouflage. It's a rally point, Anna said. She's talking strategy, probably. Those would be her captains. Notice there aren't any humans with her? Claire did. It wasn't exactly a pleasant sensation, the doubt that boiled up inside. Whatever orders Amelia delivered, it didn't take long. One by one the vampires nodded and peeled off from the meeting, gathered up followers, including human this time, and departed. By the time Amelia had dispatched the last group, there were only about 10 people left. Claire didn't know, and they were all standing together. Amelia came back to them, saw the group of humans and vamps, and nodded towards them. Claire, this is Theodosius Goldman, Amelia said. Theo, he prefers to be called. These are his family. Family? That was a shock, because there were so many of them. Theo seemed to be a kind of middle-aged with grey and curly hair and a face that, except for its vampire pallor, seemed kind of nice. May I present my wife, Patience, he said with a kind of old manners Claire had only seen on Masterpiece Theatre. Our sons, Virgil and Clarence. Their wives, Ida and Minnie. There were more vampires bowing, or in this case, of the one guy down on the floor, with his head held in the lap of a female vamp waving, and their children. Evidently the grandchildren didn't merit individual introductions. There were 4 of them, 2 boys and 2 girls, all pale like their relatives. They seemed younger than Claire, at least physically. She guessed a littler girl was probably about 12, the older boy around 15. The older boy and girl glared at her as if she were personally responsible for the mess they were in. But Claire was too busy imagining how a whole family, down to grandchildren, could all be made of vampires like this. Theo, evidently, could see all that in her expression, because he said, We were made eternal a long time ago, my girl. By, he cast a quick look at Amelia, who nodded, by her father, Bishop. It was a joke of his, you see, that we should all be together for all time. He really did have a kind face, Claire thought, and his smile was kind of tragic. The joke turned on him, though. We refused to let it destroy us. It merely showed us we did not have to kill to survive. So, we were able to keep our faith as well as our lives. Your faith? It's a very old faith, Theo said, and today is our Sabbath. Claire blinked. Oh, you're Jewish? He nodded, eyes fixed on her. We found a refuge here in Morganville. A place where we could live in peace, both of our nature and our God, Amelia said softly. But will you fight for it now, Theo? This place that you give your refuge? He held out his hand. His wife's cool white fingers closed around it. She was a delicate china doll of a woman, with masses of sleek black hair piled on top of her head. Not today. I'm sure God would understand if you broke the Sabbath under these circumstances. I'm sure he would. God is forgiving, or we would not still be walking this world. But to be moral is not to need his divine forgiveness, I think. He shook his head again, very regretfully. We cannot fight, Amelie. Not today. And I prefer not to fight at all. If you think you can stay neutral in this, you're wrong. I'll respect your wishes. My father will not. Theo's face hardened. If your father threatens my family again, then we will fight. But until he comes for us, until he shows us the sword, we will not take up arms against him. Gerard snorted, which proved that he thought about it. Claire wasn't much surprised. He seemed like a practical sort of guy. Amelia simply nodded. I can't force you, and I wouldn't. But be careful. I cannot spare anyone to help you. You'll be safe enough here for a time. If any others come through, send them out to guard the power station and the campus. She allowed her gaze to move beyond Theo, to touch the 3 humans huddled in the far corner of the room, under another painting, a big one. Are these under your protection? Theo shrugged. They asked to join us. Theo? I will defend them if someone tries to harm them. Theo pitched his voice lower. Also, we may need them if we can't get supplies. Claire went cold. For all his kind face and smile Theo was talking about using those people as portable blood banks, I don't want to do it, Theo continued. But if things go against us, I have to think of my children. You understand? I do, Amelie said. Her face was back to a blank mask that gave away nothing of how she felt about it. I have never told you what to do, and I will not now. But by the laws of this town, if you place these humans under your protection, we owe them certain duties. You know that. Another shrug, and Theo held out his hand to show her he was helpless. Family comes first, he said. I have always told you so. Some of us, Amelia said, are not so fortunate in our choice of families. She turned away from Theo without waiting for his response. If he'd been intending to give one, and without so much as a pause, slammed her fist into a glass-fronted wall box labelled emergency use only. 3 steps to the right, it shattered in a loud clatter, and Amelia shook shards of glass from her skin, shrieked into the box and took out. Claire blinked. Is that a paintball gun? Amelia handed it to Hannah, who handled it like a professional. It fires pellets loaded with silver powder, she said. Very dangerous 'twas. Be careful where you aim. Always am, Hannah said. Extra magazines? Amelia retrieved them from the case and handed them over. Claire noticed that she protected herself even from a casual touch, with a fold of fabric over her fingers. There are 10 shots per magazine, she said. There's one already loaded, and 6 more here. Well, Hannah said, any problem I can't solve with 70 shots is probably going to kill us anyway. Claire, Amelia said, and handed over a small, sealed vial. Silver powder, packed under pressure. It will explode on impact, so be very careful with it. If you throw it, there is a wide dispersal through the air. It can hurt your friends as much as your enemies. There were real uses for silver powder, like coating parts in computers. Claire supposed it wasn't exactly restricted, but she was surprised the vampires were progressive enough to lay in a supply. Amelia raised pale eyebrows at her. You've been expecting this, Claire said. Not in detail, but I've learnt through my life that such preparations are never wasted. In the end, sometime, somewhere, life always comes to a fight, and peace always comes to an end. Theo said very quietly, Amen. Hello everyone, thank you for listening to the audio file or audio reading I've done of a Rachel Kane book. I'm putting this in there, so if you want to skip past this bit and move on to the next video, that's fine by me. This is just like a cancer plug, because I want to do this, as well as also I have to do this, because the thing you've just listened to is illegal for me to do without having a charity case behind it, which I feel I don't want it to be like a situation like, oh, I'm only doing this for the sake of cancer, which I'm actually doing this for the sake of cancer, but I did cancel this series a long time ago. It came to my recent attention that I should redo this in a better format, and I feel like now is a perfect opportunity to actually restart this in the worst possible way. Back in 1st of November, back in 2020, Rachel Kane sadly passed away to a rare bone cancer called sarcoma. Now, in the description below is going to be a link that you can. It's going to be a link so you can support the research into helping people survive and defeat sarcoma bone cancer and soft tissue cancer cells and all that stuff. So that's just going to be in the description right there down below. It is in pounds for those American ones, but obviously PayPal and all the research still goes to the same thing, because once it's been cured, once they found a cure for it or found an easier solution for it and stuff like that, it does get sent around all around the world, because everyone works on the same thing all over the world. It's just that this charity is based in UK. I live in the UK, so it still goes to the same goal to beat sarcoma for a long time, and I feel like this is the best opportunity to work with it for any Rachel Kane books that we do during the Morganville series or any future series that we do. Obviously, this is even going to be in the future series if we do them. So any book that we do by Rachel Kane is going to have this at the end, just to plug a little bit of a cancer support for people with sarcoma, because it is a rare cancer, and there is not a very good survival rate. So just putting that in there to help people or to support the issues that are out there, because I'm not going to get any money from these videos at all, even in like the present one. I'm not getting any money of this recording, or in the future, if possibly I do. But this is not what I'm about. This is all about for what Rachel Kane succumbed to in the end. So hopefully that as a team together we can beat sarcoma and end one of the cancers that are killing people, because no one likes that. But anyway, have a good day.